this email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Welcome back to part two of my conversation with Alison Wood Brooks. Alison is a Harvard professor and researcher that studies the psychology of conversation. So a couple years ago in the Harvard Business Review, you wrote about the surprising power of questions.
Yes.
You say that when we ask questions, we improve our emotional intelligence, which in turn makes us better questioners. My first question around that is, what is emotional intelligence?
This is so funny. I had a colleague just the other day who asked me the same question. And this is a scholar who studies emotional intelligence
I don't feel bad
as their career. I think often people will use the phrase emotional intelligence almost as a catch-all for lots of far-ranging interpersonal skills. Because of the imprecision of that idea, I think it can be misleading, right? We see this phrase, people use this phrase a lot. We see a lot of stuff in the media about it. And I find it to be a little bit of an imprecise category because your ability to express emotions is quite different than an ability to perceive other people's emotions. And both of those things are quite distinct from your ability to engage with other people in conversation. So I try to avoid using the phrase emotional intelligence, but it does help because there is nice evidence out there showing that having high emotional intelligence is connected with performance. So in a way, if it's helpful to persuade people who otherwise wouldn't think of these quote unquote soft skills as important, if you can use that evidence to persuade people that look, stuff other than information and content and quantifiable skills, things other than that matter, then I'm all for it. But when we get down to the nitty-gritty of what is it and what matters, I think we can be a lot more precise.
I think back to when you were a kid and you probably had this game where you saw this done where there are maybe 5 or 6 people in a row and the first person whispers in person number two's ear a secret and their job is to whisper to the next person.
Yes, telephone.
What you find coming out of the last person is not remotely close to what was whispered in the first person's ear.
Yeah.
And I think to me that's kind of communication, right? But it's not a conversation. And I think the reason the message gets changed is each individual person doesn't have the opportunity to ask questions and get clarification. But what do you mean by that? Did you mean this or did you mean that? So why do you think people are so hesitant to ask questions?
Oh my gosh, there's so many reasons. What you were just describing, by the way, we call repair questions. It's a specific category. If you can't hear someone or you don't understand them, you'll hear a lot like, oh, what's that? Can you say that again? Repair questions are very important. Otherwise, information transmission doesn't work. It's
not
really
well.
important. Not well. So what holds people back from asking questions? There is a really nice paper coming out soon by scholars at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, Maurice Schweitzer and Einav Hart, thinking about this question exactly. If we know that asking questions is good, we know that it increases likability, it increases information exchange. Like all the good things come from asking more questions. So what holds people back? The first answer is egocentrism. Often it doesn't even occur to people to ask questions because they're so in their own heads and so focused on their own perspective. It's easy to forget that like all the people around you have just as much, if not more information than you do, and you could learn that from them. So that's the first category. You don't want to be in that category. You don't want to forget to ask questions. All right.
Right.
The second thing is maybe you do think to ask questions, but you're afraid to ask the wrong question. There's a lot of flavors of wrong, at least invented in your mind. People worry about asking questions that are too intrusive or too sensitive, that they will be offensive in some way. This intuition is usually wrong, and that's what Maurice and Einav have found in their work, is that our fears about asking things that are too intrusive are usually misplaced. There's also the worry, so there's this worry that you're going to view me negatively based on what I ask, or that I'm going to hurt you in some way by what I ask. There's also this category of things where I worry that my question itself will reveal something about me, like my lack of competence, or that I wasn't listening earlier in the conversation. And so I'm asking I'm asking you something you already said. I think these fears are probably the most legitimate Right. Like if you really weren't listening earlier in the conversation and you ask people to repeat themselves, or you ask a question that you really should know the answer to, that's a legitimate fear. And the solution for it is just listen more carefully, right? Like then you won't repeat things that other people have said. We don't have evidence on this, but I'm sure that it's true that people are more understanding of questions that ask them to repeat themselves, or even questions that reveal subtle incompetencies. People are much more forgiving than we think they will be, because just by the act of revealing that is a sort of expression of confidence. The smartest people know that they don't know everything, right? Like, so it's okay to reveal that to other people at times. And the act of asking other people questions is so enjoyable that people will be more forgiving than you think they will be, for the most part.
I think that I often will ask a question, but I'll paraphrase and say, so this is what I think I heard. Is this correct?
Right.
That way I can be completely wrong. I can come across as a complete idiot, which is fine, but at least now I'm going to get the right direction. Or they can say, well, that's not quite what I meant, or yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about. So I think that's always helpful.
And that's brilliant, because conversation is a two-way street, right? Like if you misunderstand something, it's partially their fault, probably, and partially your fault. And so like working together to make sure you get it right is the collaborative thing that we're all aiming for.
Exactly. So in that article, you also said that questioning is a uniquely powerful tool for unlocking value in organizations. It spurs exchange of ideas, which I'm passionate about, of course.
Mm-hmm.
It builds rapport and trust among team members and improves interpersonal bonding. And I really, interpersonal bonding is also important to me, because I work on a lot of big projects, and as in a matrix organization, you don't own the people on your project team. And so therefore they have to establish a bond amongst themselves and hold themselves accountable. And I was just wondering, in your research, and this may not be a fair question, maybe it's on the periphery of what you really focus on, but do you believe that the questioning, actually, that skill helps lead to higher performing teams? Have you seen any evidence of that?
Interesting. So most of my research has been focused on one-on-one conversation, because we're sort of in early days of figuring out all of these conversational dynamics. We sort of have to start with the simplest, smallest size groups that we can to start figuring out the building blocks of conversation, and then we can expand to groups and teams. We do know that asking questions builds bonds and trust and likability in dyads. We have some early evidence that it does so in groups as well. But we also know that when you move from dyads to groups, this is not a trivial move. Everything gets more complicated in groups, everything. And it's so much so that it's almost not the same task, right? Like every week, I have this paper called the many minds problem. As soon as, like, let's imagine you're with a colleague at a bar just having drinks. As soon as a third person pulls up a chair, everything gets exponentially more complicated and changes, because when you're one-on-one, you are taking turns. You're speaking or they're speaking. You're speaking or they're speaking. As soon as a third person joins the group, one of the group members could be totally silent, and it's okay, and the conversation is going to carry on. So you get into this dynamic of like rotating, you become sort of rotating members of an audience, and then that audience can grow as the group size grows. And of course, every dyadic pair in the group has unique perceptions and beliefs about the other people in the group. So it just is a sort of exponential growth problem in terms of complexity. So with that huge preamble, yes, I think question asking is helpful across the board. All of the evidence we've collected suggests that question asking is helpful for building bonds and expressing empathy and improving understanding and information exchange. In any conversation of any group size, you have a very complex set of goals, right? So some of your goals are about information exchange, productivity, maybe conveying information, receiving information, making divergent progress where you're going to be brainstorming, making convergent progress through making a decision. So you've got these sort of like productivity goals. At the same time, everybody has enjoyment goals where they want to enjoy the interaction that's taking place and not have it be horrible and dreadful and boring and angry or unpleasant. And at the same time, we have all of these social connection goals that are related to sort of the longer term view of where these relationships are going. So I'm constantly wanting to make a good impression on other people. I'm constantly wanting to form and adjust my impressions of other people. So all of these things are going on at once. We have this really complex constellation of conversational goals, and often they conflict with one another, right? So if I want to only convey clear information to you, sometimes that information is boring and sometimes it makes me look bad. And that's where you get into trouble, right? Like, when should you prioritize your impression, making a good impression, over conveying clear information? And how can you do both? And so question asking is a nice strategy that usually in most situations can achieve like most of the goals. It makes a good impression, it helps with information exchange, and it feels good. So you're satisfying the sort of enjoyment goals, the productivity goals, and the social impression management goals all at once. And that's where we think the magic of question asking really lies.
Now, do you find that there are, I don't want to use these too lightly, but type A and type B personalities? Do you find that a type A personality is really chomping at the bit and it's like, I don't have time for this. Let's just go and want us to race on. Whereas a type B personality might say, well, no, even if I don't think your question is good, I want to hear your question so that I can start to establish some kind of a rapport with you. And so I can do that through listening to your question and seeing what you have to say. Whereas certain personality types are like, we don't have time. Let's just go. Do you find that at all or no?
We think about different conversation types a lot. People, their preferences about conversation style and pacing and preferences for the topics themselves and the frequency with which you change topics varies quite widely across people. And I think it comes down to, like, some people are fine talking about one topic for a whole conversation and they want to like really think about it and take a deep dive on it, and they're okay with that. And for many others, that would be very boring and slow and hard to engage. So this is something that we're thinking about a lot these days, is what are people's conversation preferences? What are their preferences about topic selection? Do they like talking about topics they themselves are interested in, or do they enjoy talking about topics that their partner's obviously interested in? What are their preferences for topic switching? How frequently should you do it, and in what way? All of these things are sort of yet to be determined.
So it sounds like preparedness is helpful. You need to have a strategy of, these are the types of people I may run into, and this person, clearly question asking is going to put them off. So I need to be able to be self-aware of the situation and go, that's not going to work. Let me switch to something that is going to make him or her happy or keep them engaged.
Yep.
Okay.
This is related to question asking in the sense that the type of conversation really matters. So before I was talking about how sometimes your goals conflict within yourself, and that's hard. So balancing your sort of trade-offs and achieving different types of goals. But then your set of goals might conflict much more or less with another person's set of goals. And that's where you get into these sort of conflictual conversations. That's why we have whole courses at business schools designed around negotiation and helping people work through disagreement and work through really tricky situations to reach agreement. And so asking questions might differ a lot when you're talking about very competitive, conflictual conversations. What on the surface looks like a really empathic, kind, curious conversational approach quickly becomes invasive and sort of prodding and too intrusive if someone feels like you're trying to get privileged information and pry it from them. So knowing what environment you're in and what your conversation partner's goals are and knowing what your own goals are very, very important in deciding, am I asking too many questions? What topics should we discuss? Should we move on to something more benign, or when should we take a deep dive into our sort of conflict topic?
And obviously that's doable if you're one-on-one to switch like that. But if you're in a group dynamic, then the chances of keeping all 5 people in the group happy in a conversation are probably limited, because one of them is going to be racing to go ahead. One of them is more interested in talking about, really establishing those bonds. And then, as you said earlier, the group dynamics really, really shift.
It's one of the many challenges of group conversation is how do we manage topic flow? How do we manage topics so that they're interesting to everybody, especially in a heterogeneous group or in a large group? How do we manage topic flow and changing topics so that everyone stays engaged but doesn't feel like we're moving so fast that they can't even follow what's going on? In the class that I teach, we talk a lot about topic leadership and topic followership. As soon as you get into a group that's larger than like 4 or 5 people, there needs to be a clear assignment of roles, like who is the topic leader here? And that person needs to do a good job. They need to do a good job of prepping topics. They need to do a good job of designing both a good plan or agenda of what you're going to talk about, but be flexible enough in the moment to let people go off on productive tangents. And those skills, to me, are a huge opportunity for people to claim in terms of seizing leadership and showing their their sort of conversational acumen in leadership and groups.
Well, I want to talk next about something that we're actually doing, I think, pretty well on this call. And I've heard you say that follow-up questions are a great tactic to use. In fact, you call them magical.
Yes.
So what makes them so special?
Isn't it weird when a scientist uses the word magical? That seems
I love
ironic. If everyone walks away with one takeaway from this conversation, I hope that it's to ask more follow-up questions. Follow-up questions achieve all of the great things. They show that you are listening, because you can only ask a follow-up question if you heard what your conversation partner said in the turn before.
Right.
You're probing more deeply for more information on what they just said. So it expresses curiosity, it expresses interest, it expresses care and validation of what they just said. All of these things are what we talk about when we think about responsiveness and good listening and being responsive to your partner. High responsiveness predicts all kinds of very healthy relationship outcomes, both in close relationships and marriage, and like marriages, and also in business relationships. Also, it's really important for information exchange. If people often will talk about, how do we get away from small talk? Like, well, how do we get deep on a topic? And I think we have this strong intuition that it's the topics themselves that make a conversation deep. Like, oh, we have to talk about your childhood, and then we'll have a deep conversation. When in fact, you can go deep on any topic. You could start with something really mundane and sort of shallow, like the weather, but you can get deep on it really fast if you follow the right pattern of topic selection and follow-up question asking. I say, do you like the weather outside today? And you tell me, and I say, oh, why? That's so interesting. What do you like about thunderstorms? Did you like thunderstorms when you were a child? What did you do with your parents when it was thunderstorming outside, right? So asking sort of follow-up questions and getting to that deep place quickly with someone, that's what can make conversations deep. It's not necessarily about choosing these sort of like nostalgic or profound topics at the outset.
I think one of the things that I read of your writing, you had talked about the strategy can be different. Sometimes asking the hard question first can really, you still get to the same place you want to get to. Other times you want to ease into it. So I guess it depends on the person.
Yep. It depends on the person. It depends on your preferences. It depends on your conversation partner's preferences. It depends on what type of conversation you're having or what types of topics you expect to discuss. As I said before, if you're in a competitive conversation and you kick it off by asking, like, how much can you afford? It doesn't set a great tone, right? It's too aggressive. It's harsh. It puts them on the defensive. Everyone, no matter who they are or what your goals are for the conversation, does not want to be in a dreadful, confrontational, unpleasant interaction ever. Like never
buying a car.
Yeah, you never walk it. No one looks forward to going and buying a car. Like
right.
You dread those conversations so much. So knowing that, even in the most difficult situation, you have to go in with the goal of making it enjoyable for them, for your conversation partner, and for yourself. And if you go in with that mindset, even for really tricky, profoundly conflictual topics, you can succeed, right? You can get through it and not make it dreadful and still want to talk to each other again at the end of the interaction.
So I think for me, the takeaway for the follow-up questions really is, it says, I heard what you said, first of all. And secondly, I actually care about it enough to ask you some more questions and learn more about it. So I think that's the power or the magic, if you will, of follow-up questions.
And it's really simple, right? Like what's really nice about follow-up questions is you don't have to prepare them. All you have to do is listen to your partner, think about what they're saying, and then ask for more.
It's hard to believe that's so difficult to listen.
It is hard. It is hard.
It is hard to have a conversation if only one of us is listening. That's not a good thing, right? It's no longer a dialogue. You actually mentioned, I had seen this new course you're teaching. I had seen the video of it, of how to talk gooder in business and life.
Yeah.
My obvious question was the choice of the word gooder. And I probably read way too much into it, but I was wondering, was it just to grab attention, or was it to imply that the language used isn't as important as that the conversation actually takes place?
So I love your interpretation. I love that you spent any amount of time thinking about this. It's so good. The intention is sort of twofold. And people have asked me this a couple times. The intention is twofold. One, the L of talk, levity, is very important. And I wanted to convey that in the title of the course itself. Like, we're not going to take ourselves too seriously. This is meant to be fun. And I like your interpretation also that the words themselves often don't matter as much as the way that you convey them and how the conversation unfolds. Even if you make a mistake grammatically or logically, or you stammer or whatever, you can recover from it quickly with the right recovery tactics.
Yeah, I remember early in my career, I was in the Navy, and one of the officers I worked for asked me if I wrote, and I said, "Yeah, I write good," which he chuckled at. Clearly, this was pre-college, so I didn't know what I did.
You nailed it.
We probably have already talked about some of these, but what tactics can you share with us to really be able to talk gooder in your lives and careers? I know we talked about asking questions, and I guess maybe it's your whole talk acronym, but anything else that really you want to talk about in that vein of how to talk gooder?
Most of the time when we think of the greatest conversationalists we know, it is very common that people describe those people as funny. So if you feel like you're not a funny person, that's okay. There are some things you can do. You got to try. You have to try, and you get credit from other people just trying to make jokes. Like, even if they're not funny, people do view you as more confident if you attempt jokes. If you still think you're not hilarious, it's okay. But what I urge my students to do who are not hilarious is appreciate other people's humor. Meaning, we always want you to be sort of like right on the verge of a smile or a laugh, so that you can appreciate other people's humor. And as a leader or a team member, you can be a contributor to sort of culture of levity. If you're in a group and everybody is serious and every topic is serious and every moment of your interaction is serious, no one's going to enjoy being there. You don't look forward to seeing each other. You're losing out on benefits of levity, like creativity and group bonding and cohesion and all of these amazing benefits of humor and playfulness. So even if you yourself cannot be funny, it's okay, but make sure that you're not a wet blanket either. Make sure you're ready to laugh and ready to smile when other people are brave enough to try.
I've seen some of your presentations, and you do inject humor. And when I teach classes, I have a 2-day class that I teach, and when I'm with them for 16 hours, 8 hours for 2 days in a row.
Oh my God.
And I have my humor, and I got to tell you, there are some classes where I start I interject my humor and nobody laughs, and it just takes the life out of you. It's like by the end of the first day, I'm like, this group, I have no energy left, right? But I go to India and I teach for 5. It does. And I go to India and teach for 5 straight days, and we do 14-hour days. And somebody says, "Where's your energy come from?" And it's you. You guys are, you're listening to what I'm saying. You're laughing at my jokes, even if it's gratuitous laughter. It seems like it's real.
Yeah.
So I think it does head to the energy level in the conversation.
Definitely. And that's true of like sort of more one-way communication and public speaking and teaching, but it's also true in one-on-one conversation and small group conversation. It is exhausting to be a part of a conversation that is humorless. It really is. And we've never seen it more saliently than right now. These conversations over Zoom and how everybody has the habit, and rightly so, of if you're in a group larger than, let's say, 10 people, everybody has to mute themselves to mitigate the background noise. But that means that the speaker, even if they're attempting humor, is hearing no laughter. Whether you're teaching on Zoom or leading a meeting on Zoom, it's just that Zoom fatigue sets in so quickly for many reasons, but this is a huge contributor. It's just totally soul-sucking to speak to a group and not share laughter together or not hear the laughter that's happening.
I think you're going to appreciate this next one. So I'm going to use your own words from that video. Can I throw a smoke bomb and switch topics from the power of questions to humor?
Yes, do it, Clint. You nailed it.
So we're kind of talking about levity anyway. We'll continue on. So I think it was in 2016, there was a study, Risky Business, when humor increases and decreases status.
Yes.
You and your team, you guys did 8 experiments and really concluded that the successful use of humor can actually increase an employee's perceived status.
Yeah.
When I was thinking about this, to me, in reality, funny is kind of in the ears of the listener. Mm. What's funny to one person might actually be offensive to another. And I've got some personal stories of that. But so how do you define status? And then how do you motivate people to use humor, but without crossing the line? Or should they even worry about that?
Okay, so status is, we think of status as a subjective perception. It's not necessarily your formal status in a hierarchy. That's more like power. Do you have power over other people and resources? But status is in the eye of the beholder. It's how much other people respect and admire you. And it's often correlated with power, right? We often respect people who are like sort of higher ups or leaders within an organization or a hierarchy in a group, but not necessarily. And so what we find in this paper is that humor is risky, and it's risky because it can fail in at least three distinct ways. One, a humor attempt could be viewed as not funny by the people around you. And that's what funny is, a sort of private belief, right? We never really know if the people around us thought our joke was funny
because I know I'm hilarious.
Because well, and judgments of funniness are private. So it's not necessary. I'm sure it's correlated with laughter, but not perfectly so, because we laugh for all kinds of reasons, like politeness and deference and respect. So funny is a private thought. Then there's laughter. Some people might think your jokes are funny and they don't laugh. They withhold laughter for all kinds of politeness and appropriateness reasons. So there's the private thoughts of funniness. There's the public expression of laughter. And then there's judgments of appropriateness. So even if I think your sort of snarky comment is hilarious, and even if I laugh, I might think it was like not a good thing for you to say given the context, especially in the workplace where there are very stringent rules, like display rules of what you're allowed to say and what people will view as appropriate or inappropriate. So there are all these ways that jokes can fail. But what we find is that even when you attempt to make jokes, people view you as confident. They appreciate that you had the courage to try. And if you can land a joke, if people laugh, and they view it as appropriate, it gives you these like enormous boosts in their perceptions of both your confidence and your competence, because people know that it takes quite a smart person to sort of navigate the difficult boundaries of humor. So if you can land a joke, it's incredible. Like, great job. Even a little bit of a chuckle, you should celebrate as a victory.
I think that it's helpful to have a backup plan too, because there's sometimes at the end of 2 days and they're tired, I tell a joke that almost always gets a laugh, but if they don't, my response is always, well, y'all must be tired because that was clearly funny.
Exactly.
Which point they always laugh, right? So
yes, these recovery strategies are really important, and I think can be very empowering for people who are not used to telling jokes too. Like, it's totally fine if it bombs, but just be ready with a recovery joke. So yours is really good. There's also, you could say like, I'll be here all night, or again, that was the joke, or even just like, oh, so that was a good one, right? Like, just a self-deprecating sort of recovery. You'll always get a laugh to sort of cut the awkwardness.
Yeah, sometimes if it's a presentation that's on my laptop, I'll put the applause sign up so they know, and they usually laugh, right? So
it's awesome.
You actually give two examples, and I want to talk about the positive one as opposed to the negative one, but it was about Dick Costello, and the night before he joined Twitter as a chief operating officer, he tweeted, "First full day as Twitter COO tomorrow. Task number 1, undermine CEO, consolidate power." And then a year later, he's the CEO. So clearly he used humor, and it was a positive thing.
Yeah. I in my course, I have an amazing teacher and scholar from Stanford. Her name is Naomi Bagdonas. She teaches a course at Stanford called Humor, Serious Business, and she co-teaches it with my co-author, Jennifer Acker. So Naomi came to my class this spring, and she teaches the students many ways, many strategies to be funnier. And one of the core strategies that she suggests that comedians use, that funny people use, is trying to observe the world, like find these little kernels of truth and then exaggerate them. And so Dick Costello is a really good example. Like, he was ascending the hierarchy within the company. He was like on the precipice of actually taking over. So like, why not turn it into a timely, exaggerated joke? It's terrific.
Oftentimes I find there's a grain of truth in the joke that one chooses to tell.
Always.
Yeah.
There has to be. We have to have a shared reality about some small truth, and just exaggerating a little bit often can get a laugh.
All right. Well, I just have a few questions left as we're kind of coming to the close of our hour together.
Oh my gosh, time flies when you're changing topics, Clint. Good job.
And when the conversationalist is excellent, right? Which you are clearly. So I'm going to tie off of the question I asked earlier about type A, type B, but let's change the words to extrovert and introvert. Mm-hmm. I think that the perception often is that an introvert is not a good conversationalist, but my finding has been that if it's one-on-one, they might be quite engaging and quite open to share, but it's when you get into the group dynamic that they tend to shut down.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, do you find that can an introvert not be a natural conversationalist, or do you see situations where an extrovert actually struggles?
So in my research, I haven't studied a lot of individual differences, but I share your intuition about introverts and extroverts, that introverts are terrific conversationalists, and they're just more comfortable one-on-one, which honestly makes a lot of sense. Groups are really complicated, and unless you enjoy the complexity and sort of mania of being in a group and trying to figure it all out and sort of like be the life of the party, one-on-one conversations are more effective for information exchange and impression management, and you have more control. What's interesting, and I think embedded in your question is a really nice hypothesis, it's possible that introverts are more responsive listeners one-on-one as well, because they're not trying to be the life of the party, but they're trying to sort of like engage thoughtfully with people one-on-one. Again, I have not done research on introversion and extroversion, but I like your prediction.
Well, I think to kind of go along with that, maybe is the extrovert might also be more likely to be the egocentrical person, potentially. I'm not saying that's 100%, but most introverts I don't think are that way. So
turns out most humans are pretty egocentric.
we
so
are.
we all boomerang from time to time and turn it right back to ourselves.
Because we're comfortable there, right?
Yeah.
So in all the work that you've done, is there anything that's really surprised you when you came out of that study that you did or that analysis you did? You're like, I did not expect that. Was there anything that jumps out at you about that topic?
There's one paper we're working on, or a project we're working on right now. This is with a PhD student at Harvard named Hannah Collins. She's amazing. And she has all of these really interesting data sets. So she has like a data set from France where they tracked people and their interactions over a course of 2 weeks. She has a data set that was intended to study how colds spread between people. So they like purposefully infect some people with colds and then study how it spreads to people, which feels very relevant right now. And then there's like the American Time Use Survey, where people keep a diary of how they spend their time. So she collected all of these sort of disparate data sets that all just happen to capture when and how and with whom people interact. And what she found, what she was looking at, is a measure of what she's calling convo diversity, but really it's looking at the people that you interact with in a day and thinking of it as sort of like a portfolio. What are your relationships with each of those people? And looking at the diversity of that set of people. So am I interacting with only my husband, only work colleagues? Am I only having phone calls with family members? Or am I seeing like a huge range? I'm seeing like acquaintances, strangers, friends, colleagues, family over the course of a day. And what she's finding is that the more diverse your portfolio over the course of like long time periods, the happier you are in life. So to me, that was really enlightening. That was surprising. You could imagine all kinds of hypotheses, like only interacting with your best friends and your life mate and your favorite work colleagues. Maybe that's better. But it turns out it's not. It's really important to have sort of random bump-ins with people that you don't know as well, and people who are different from you, and people who are both higher and lower status than you. Like the diversity, especially over long time horizons, is really a good thing, both in terms of our life satisfaction and our ability to take other people's perspectives. Because if we're only seeing the same people all the time, it's harder for us to understand the perspectives of others who are quite different from us.
Maybe that explains what I saw on the news yesterday, where they talked about all the shelters are pretty much empty of animals now. Maybe I'm tired of talking to my spouse and I went out and got a dog.
Oh my gosh. And 9 months, everybody's going to be having babies.
Or divorced.
and divorce. That's right. Or both.
I have one last official question. And where do you, so you talked earlier in the conversation around machine learning and all the things that have really allowed you to take the research forward. Do you see anything game changing coming up in the next decade that's going to really step change things?
I am both intrigued and a bit troubled about where conversational AI is heading. So Facebook AI, which is not the Facebook we all use to interact with each other, it's a sort of separate arm of Facebook, and other companies like Google and stuff are developing these conversational bots that they aim to make quite human, right? They're aiming to make these robots or chat bots interact with humans in a way that seems convincingly human, maybe even optimally human. Like maybe the bot can take my course and get really good at topic selection and asking questions and making jokes and stuff. So these bots work on all these skills too. I'm not sure where that's headed. It makes me a little bit concerned overall, and I'm not sure how companies will utilize those bots. And I just want to make sure that people who study and work on conversation are using their sort of science and power for good to help people at the end of the day, and not just help themselves to make more money.
So it has a bit of a Fahrenheit 451 feel to it.
A little bit. I mean, it's also really cool. It's also really neat to think about what it means to develop machines that can do the most unique human skills. It's just a little scary to think about what happens when they get better at it than us.
We're out of a job.
Yeah.
Well, you've been an awesome guest today, Alison, and I really appreciate you spending time with us. If the listeners actually want to learn more about the work you do, where should they go?
Oh my goodness. They can visit my website, Google my name, Alison Wood Brooks at Harvard Business School. You can find all kinds of dry academic articles to read, and lots of more short media pieces about things as well. I'm also working on a book which should come out in a year or two.
Oh, awesome. We'll have to have you back on the show when that book comes out then.
Clint, you are a walking role model of topic prep and question asking. Thank you so much for having me on the program.
I really appreciate you being on the conversation, Alison.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett. To find out more about Clint, go to projectsuccess.com or pick up Clint's book, The Project Success Method, at amazon.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.